I think they don't think about it that way, and that they play an active role in teaching others how to treat them. We all do, and we do so by how we respond to their whatever type of behavior. In this case, it's bullying. So we don't realize we actually encourage people to bully us when we come across in those types of ways.
Hi, welcome to the Tarun Stevenson Leadership Channel. I'm your host, Tarun Stevenson, and we are all about helping you lead, communicate, and grow to your full potential. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite podcasting app, don't forget to subscribe and follow so that you can stay up to date with all our latest episodes. All right, here's the latest episode. Let's get into it. Well, hey everybody, I am here with my good friend Jeff Riggenbach, who is a psychologist and expert in cognitive behavior therapy and personality disorders. And I am really looking forward to this conversation, Jeff, because you are really a world-renowned expert on these topics. I mean, traveled all over the world. Canada, Mexico, South Africa, even Australia. You've made it down here and taught thousands and thousands of clinicians. And now you're actually adapting your work for the general public. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, my friend. Yeah, we've had like 5 straight days of 106 degrees here. I don't know what that is down there. Maybe in the 40s probably. So
right.
I'm already missing my time there down under.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've just
you guys can probably have some pretty brutal weather as well, but I just had an amazing month down there. So I'm certainly missing it with the weather we've had here recently.
Yeah, well, the last time you were here and we caught up, it was good weather. I think you were here in September, and that's the best time to be in my neck of the woods. But we're just heading into winter now, so I can't say it's very warm here. But
right.
so good to have you. So why don't we start by just telling our audience a little bit about yourself, how you got into what you do, and what you hope to achieve out of this conversation tonight.
Yeah, so again, thanks for having me. It's been a kind of a fun transition or expansion for me. I mean, after 20 years of clinical practice and training psychologists and other behavioral health professionals in my areas of expertise, which, as you mentioned, is cognitive therapy, so thinking and mindset type of issues, and then particularly with individuals with personality disorders.
Right.
After 20 years of clinical work and training in that, actually took a little time off, a little medical leave, had a kidney transplant, and used that time off to transition into some leadership development type of stuff. It's when I got affiliated with the John Maxwell team. It's how I connected with you and a number of other wonderful people. And so one of the things that I realized is that not only can people have personality disorders, but organizations can have personality disorders as well. And there are high conflict people. There's difficult people in organizations and workplaces and schools and churches. And so I've sort of expanded my training to address some of these issues that, people run into in everyday life, and they don't know that there's a diagnosis behind it. And oftentimes there's not, but we all run into difficult people in a variety of settings. And as leaders, I think it's important that we know how to relate with a variety of different kinds of people. So that's the gist of the training and coaching that I'm up to these days.
It's fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to digging into this conversation about difficult people. As we've discussed, I teach a course on leading difficult people. And one of the most common responses I get when I'm promoting my course from a lot of leaders is the way you deal with difficult people is just to get rid of them. And in my experience, I've found that you get rid of one difficult person, you'll just replace them with somebody else. Difficult people are a fact of life. Sometimes we as leaders are the difficult people. So why don't you just give us a primer, if you like, of when you're talking about difficult people, you're not just talking about people that you maybe have the occasional conflict with. You're talking about somebody who is actively working against you in an organization or in a work setting. Just unpack that idea for us a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good question because it's a lot easy for us to you just label somebody else a difficult person
Yeah.
and not oftentimes see our own role in this. When I was researching for my trainings and my book, I actually came across over 300 Facebook pages devoted to something related to dealing with a narcissist, healing from
Mm.
narcissistic abuse. You know, how do you live with a narcissist? How do you work with a narcissist? So in terms of group pages, fan pages, a variety of different Facebook headings, uh, all of these people set up to deal with these narcissistic
Mm.
people. And I got to thinking, boy, if I was like an alien that landed from a different planet, you would think these people called narcissists are kind
Yeah.
of like blonde-headed people. You'd think they were everywhere. I mean, the reality is that only about 2% of the population really qualifies for a narcissistic personality disorder.
Okay.
And so the reality is there aren't that many of these people out there. And
Right.
so, I mean, the point is, it's just a lot easier to call somebody else a name than it
Yeah.
is to see our own role in an interaction or a problematic relationship. So I'm glad you asked the question. We actually break down kind of 5 specific qualities of, that make somebody a high conflict personality or a difficult person. And they really all have to do with this idea of pretty strong beliefs. I
Right.
think it's kind of popular in the coaching world these days to say beliefs drive behavior.
Yeah.
And most people are familiar with the Carl Jung quote that says, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will drive our lives and we will
Yeah.
call it fate. And I mean, that is a pretty powerful quote, but I think most people don't really recognize the impact of these beliefs. And so I'll be brief here, but the first thing, sort of the first implication of a strong belief is that difficult people are very easily triggered. So they get set off very easily.
Yeah.
A second thing is that they have extreme thinking.
Right.
A third thing that's a product of that extreme thinking is that they have intense emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And intense emotion is often very difficult for people to be in a room with when things get very tense, very anxious, very angry, whatever the emotion might be. The fourth quality is that they have inflexible behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So these people have a very difficult time compromising, a very difficult time receiving criticism or hearing information of one type or another. And that type differs depending upon the type of difficult person that you are. But the fifth quality then has to do with awareness. So not only are they easily triggered, have extreme thinking, have intense emotions, have inflexible behavior, as if those 4 things weren't bad enough, the fifth thing is they don't recognize it.
Right.
And so difficult people are often a problem for other people in their lives before they become problems for themselves.
Right.
And so those are the 5 qualities that we define as the qualities of a difficult person.
Okay, so it sounds like you just described all of Facebook just there. Um,
Probably a few people for sure.
That's for sure. So yeah, the last one there you mentioned self-awareness, and I want to dig into that a little bit more because one of the aspects of what I talk about when I'm doing leadership training is the need for leaders to have self-awareness and know what it's like to be on the other side of them. What happens if somebody's listening to this right now and as you're describing it, they may be having some light bulb moments and they're saying, oh, wow, that sounds like me. Uh, is somebody in that position going to actually recognize themselves? Or if you're recognizing yourself, you probably got good self-awareness and that's not who we're talking about.
Yeah, so that's a good question also. And really, I start off my trainings by looking at sort of a continuum. I don't think we want to think about people in terms of this sort of all or nothing. I have
Yeah.
self-awareness or I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is that we're all sort of on a spectrum.
Yeah.
And so, I really sort of have 3 quadrants and there's there's sort of healthy personality function where people have pretty good awareness. Then there's those people that you do have, as you mentioned, the occasional run-in with them. So they have a few problems getting along with people, but it's not all the time. And then you've got the more extreme versions that they're going to be a problem for everybody they run into, or at least almost everybody they run into in every setting. And I say that because I think it really depends upon where you are on that spectrum.
Okay.
So for instance, there are people that might have a few of the traits of, for instance, what I call the bully.
Hmm.
Okay, and so one of the qualities of the bully, by the way, has a lot of qualities that make them good leaders. It's
Right.
oftentimes why they get promoted to
Mm.
positions of leadership. So they're really good at taking initiative. They're really good at making decisions. They're really good at delegating and telling people what to do. And a lot of those take charge qualities serve them well
Yeah.
in rising to positions of leadership.
Hmm.
But then the problem is that oftentimes accompanying those traits that could be seen as positive, they may also be prone to have things like low empathy,
Mm.
difficulty putting themselves in others' shoes, difficulty receiving criticism, some of these kinds of things. And
Yeah.
so if they just have a certain degree of that and they're not completely off the scale, then they certainly could have some level of awareness. And these are probably the people that you're referring to that would have these
Yeah.
light bulb moments and think, oh, maybe you could try to see where so-and-so is coming from a little bit
Mm.
better. It's the people that are kind of off the scales that you're right.
Yeah.
They're not even going to recognize it as they're having this conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So you've talked about one type of personality, and it's probably a good place to segue into. I guess what the rest of this conversation is going to look like is your training is based around a DISC profile, or the personality profiling that uses the DISC acronym. And what you've done is taken those DISC personalities that, as you say, can often be strengths, and you've identified if you like, the opposite end of the spectrum, where those personality types become problematic when working with other people. So the first DISC personality type is dominant personality. Tell us something about people who have a dominant personality. You've said that many of them often find themselves in leadership positions, or adapted to leadership positions. What are some of the other positives of a dominant personality?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned a couple of them right there. I mean, dominant personalities are very direct. They're very performance oriented. It's all about winning with the dominant
Sure.
personality. They're fueled by accomplishment. They like to get things done. I mean, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, they've got this checklist. I mean, if you've checked off 13 things that you've accomplished during that day, you've had a good day.
Yeah.
So dominant people are what the DISC refers to as task oriented, and they're also what the DISC refers to as outgoing. So
Okay.
these are outgoing, task-oriented people that are very direct. They're very, they want to take charge. They're good at making decisions. They want to get it done, and they want to get it done now.
Yeah. Okay, great. So when we talk about dominant people, we're not talking about dominance in a negative connotation. We're just saying that this is a name for a personality style that some people will have a strength in. But then there's the shadow side of that. And you mentioned bullying, but there's also another aspect to dominant personality types that you identified as problematic. Tell us about the con artist.
Yeah, so and I'm glad you pointed that out, because the DISC inherently is not, there's nothing good or bad about
Yeah.
personality traits. And dominant, sometimes I think the D gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
And maybe the D gets a bad rap because it's out of control manifestations. That's
Sure.
the language the DISC would use, out of control manifestations.
Right.
It can be actually, in the extreme form, they could be abusive in these kinds of things,
Hmm.
whereas out of control manifestations of the other three might not have the serious interpersonal ramifications. So, but
Okay.
I think perhaps the D gets a bad rap for that reason. But
Yeah.
as you point out, the D has a lot of positive qualities as well.
Sure.
But a second sort of out of control version that you asked about would be the
Mm.
con artist, and this is the
Okay.
person who is, again, this is a very extreme manifestation. This is a very small percentage of the population. But these are the people that are going to be dishonest. They're going to lie to your
Okay.
face. They're going to lie behind your back. And really, if we had to summarize it, these are the rule breakers.
Okay.
They're going to break the rules. They're going to break the norms. They're going to break the expectations. They might even break the law.
Mm.
So that's the other sort of extreme manifestation of the D that I talk about.
Okay. So tell me about that in terms of, because I know with many dominant type personalities, one of the things that makes them adept at leading is they don't allow the boundaries or constraints of convention restrict them from getting the job done. So sometimes they're prepared to color outside of the lines, if you like,
Mhm.
to get to where they want to go, and that's not necessarily seen as a negative thing, but it can have some negative ramifications if it becomes uh, a usual behavior trait. Is that what you're saying with the con artist, where they practice this habitual deception or rule breaking, and it's beyond just coloring out of the lines?
Yeah, that's right. I think, I mean, you raise a good point that you have to be able to do a little bit of that, and visionaries oftentimes
Mm,
do a little bit of that. But it's kind of a double-edged sword. And again, I always want people thinking in terms of this continuum. If you have some of that, then it can be, it can be helpful.
yeah.
But if you have too much of that, then I mean, I think unfortunately you do see people in leadership that just become, I even think of people in the sort of the top of the corporate world. Some of these
Mm,
people become very callous and unemotional and can just take advantage of people
yeah.
monetarily or interpersonally in different ways. And so, I mean, yes, there's a continuum. You could even look at I don't know what it's like in Australia, but you could look here in the States at a number of our politicians that have reached the highest levels, and
Mm,
you do see a lot of bully and a lot of con artist sort of traits
yeah.
in those folks.
Yeah. I think it's Jordan Peterson talks about one of the biggest predictors of success is a disagreeable personality type. And so, very often, you see people who are in positions of power being quite disagreeable, but then that's also one of the reasons why they got into their position of power. It's almost like this the tension between the two. You kind of need it to get ahead, but at the same time, if it's not kept in check, it can become quite destructive.
Yeah, that's right. And another part of that has to do with receiving criticism or receiving feedback from other people.
Yeah.
Um, how you take other people's feedback. I mean, if you are a leader of a company or a country or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
you have to be relatively impervious to
Yeah.
feedback. You can't let every I mean, you are going to get a lot of criticism,
Sure.
and you can't let that get under your skin. You can't let it get to you. At the same time, it is healthy to be able to receive, you know, it's healthy to be able to receive feedback from people who you trust
Yeah.
and can shoot straight with you and tell you when maybe you've gone awry here or there. And if you're not able to hear anything from anybody, that's, I think, when it becomes a problem. Other than to sort of have this filter and be able to block out most criticism and not let it get to you and impact you and in terms of your leadership versus not being able to hear any sort of feedback from anybody.
Yeah, no, that's such good advice, and uh, I would say that if anybody's listening and they find themselves in that dominant personality type, but probably one of the ways that I have found it necessary to keep things in check, because I would say that I'm probably a dominant personality type naturally, and so to keep those aspects of my personality in check, having good people around me that I give permission to speak into my life is absolutely essential. So what if somebody finds themselves not having that issue for themselves, but they have to work with somebody who has those kinds of characteristics? What are some of the traits what are some of the actions that we can take to respond to or manage the personalities that maybe become like bullies or tend to be the con artist type, extreme manifestation of the dominant personality type?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it depends upon the context that the person is in your life.
Yeah,
If if they are your mother-in-law, then you're going to respond differently than if they are a co-worker, and you're
sure.
going to respond differently than if they are your employee or your supervisor. So I
Hmm.
mean the power differential is important there, and it's
Okay.
that's probably where a person would need a good coach like you or me to
Yeah.
deal specifically to that situation, and then how do I deal specifically with that person.
Hmm.
But in general, in terms of dominant personalities, I always say first of all it's just important to try to connect with the person up front.
Yeah.
If you can do any sort of prevention you can do. I think it's good to have a fire extinguisher, but it's also good to do the fire prevention first.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
anything we can do to connect with that person. I do like a number of aspects of John Maxwell's book, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect,
Yeah.
and really kind of trying to connect with the person up front, because the more respect we've earned with dominant personalities, the more credence they might be willing to give to our opinions when we do offer them. Having said that, when we offer opinions to a D, I think timing is important, setting is important. You certainly need to choose your battles. Not every conversation is worth having. And if you have to have that conversation, there's a right time and a right place to do so. And so I think if I just had to give one piece of advice when dealing with strong dominance, it's that you never want to get into a power struggle. One of the techniques we talk about is just dropping the rope. So there's two ways to win a tug of war. And you may need to come back and deal with the situation in some sort of different way later. Maybe it means going to a supervisor. Maybe it means talking to the rest of the family. Maybe it means coming back to that person at a later point. But we never want to get in a power struggle with a D.
Great. And that's good advice. And I often advise teachers not to get into power struggles with children who try and dominate. Let's just look at that a little bit more before we move on. Would you say that the manner in which you speak with a dominant person will determine how they respond to you? I find that when I speak to very strong, direct people, if I am confident, if I am, let's say, not lacking emotion, but I leave the emotion out of the conversation and keep it really about the business or whatever you're talking about, that seems to get more credence with a dominant personality type than if you come to them emotional or, playing the victim card or something like that. Do you think that the method which you communicate has something to do with it?
No, I think that's exactly right. That's really one of the keys, if not the key, is really learning how to speak their language, so to speak, learning how to talk in a way that each of the styles can hear. And I think you hit the nail on the head with how you communicate with a D. They're very direct. They like you to be very direct. One of the keys that I talk about is knowing the triggers of different types and avoiding them. And unfortunately, some of the other styles inherently will trigger the D. So one of the things that you mentioned is excessive emotionality. And that, unfortunately, is the kind of thing that we see in the S style. The S is all about the feelings and all about, making sure nobody gets their feelings hurt and everybody's okay. And they want to socialize. They want to talk about their week. And the D gets annoyed very quickly. Let's just get down to business here. And, I don't want to spend 20 minutes, that's 20 minutes of my life I couldn't get back. Let's get down to what you were supposed to accomplish here and leave the socializing out of it. And another example would be the C, and particularly the overanalyzer. I mean, these are the people that are all about the details, and they want to spend 20 minutes not talking about, what they did socially over the weekend, but they want to ask 1,000 questions and just make sure that every single detail, there's complete clarity. And the D is ready to pull their hair out and just say, just move on and do it already. So, I mean, the way that we come across, we want to be brief. We don't want to be overly emotional. We just want to be straight to the point. We want to show confidence in what we're doing, accomplish the task, and move on.
Yeah. Great advice there. And I've often said that, we do a lot of work trying to teach in schools. We do a lot of work trying to teach kids not to be bullies. But we don't seem to do a lot of work trying to teach children how not to be victims as well. And I find that sometimes that plays into the whole bully narrative. If you're overly victimized in your the way that you approach your relationships, sometimes that can attract the ire of somebody who is naturally dominant or perhaps bullies. Am I reading that wrong, or am I saying something that perhaps I shouldn't be saying?
No, I think you're dead on. And there are probably a couple of different types of victims, but one that you described there is, that's absolutely right. I think in general, we like to say that we teach people how to treat us.
Yeah.
And we teach people how to treat us based upon our responses to their behavior. And so, yes, if you are going to sort of test me out a little bit and bully me just a little bit, and I'm going to come across as a victim, and I'm going to show that you got under my skin and I can't stand up for myself, well, then yes, I'm sort of teaching you that it's okay to run over me. And that I'm one of those people that's not going to stand up for myself. And if it's at the school, I'm not going to, tell the teacher and talk to the other kids and be assertive for myself. You can run over me there, or if it, whatever setting it's in. So it's just, I think that's pretty enlightening for a lot of people to think about. I think they don't think about it that way, and that they play an active role in teaching others how to treat them. We all do. And we do so by how we respond to their whatever type of behavior. In this case, it's bullying. So we don't realize we actually encourage people to bully us when we come across in those types of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be perfectly clear to anyone that's listening. We're not condoning bullying, and we're not condoning people who take on bullying positions. What we're trying to unpack here is, how can you respond to somebody positively and proactively if you find yourself on the other end of a bully? And one of the ways you can do it is to actually manage the way that you interact with that person. If you can interact with them confidently and assertively, you will often find that bullies will not pursue that line as vigorously as if you come at them with a victim type ideation, if you like. And that's probably a good place to talk about the second personality type in the DISC profile, which is the influencer or the inspirational person. Let's talk about some of the positives of this person, and then we'll get into the Achilles heel of the influencer and where they can find themselves getting unstuck.
Yeah, so if I could, let me just go back and piggyback off
please.
of your last comment, because that's very important. And this is not about blaming the victim. This is not about condoning any sort of bullying behavior, or when we get to the other extreme styles, it's not about condoning those out of control behaviors either. This is simply about raising awareness as to the messages that we send people without realizing it in our own behavior. So it's really about empowering. Empowering people to, as they gain awareness, be able to choose to interact differently, as you point out. So
Absolutely.
I just wanted to piggyback off of that. In terms of the I, though, the I, these are the people that make life fun. If we didn't have I's in our life, we wouldn't have any fun. The I's are very spontaneous. The I's are very gregarious. The I's are, in terms of the DISC, they're people. They're outgoing, but they're people oriented. So the D's were outgoing and they're task oriented, but the I's are then outgoing, but they're people oriented.
Gotcha.
So these are the people that love to be the center of attention. They love to make life fun. To follow the acronyms, they're inspiring, they're influential. These kinds of things. So we would have very little pleasure or joy in life, very little humor in life, without the I's in our presence.
Great. And, we, like you say, we all need those sorts of people. But what we're talking about today is how these personality types can flip to the other extreme and become difficult or problematic in relationships and leadership. So what are the weaknesses of the I personality type, the inspirational influencer?
Yeah, so the I is, so concerned about being noticed and having fun and these kinds of things that they oftentimes have difficulty getting the task done.
Yeah.
So the I, maybe the D and perhaps the C, which I think we'll talk about in a few minutes, maybe need to be reminded that there is a time to lighten up and that life can be fun.
Yeah.
The I, on the other hand, needs to be reminded that there's a place and a time to be serious. Right. There are contexts in life that require seriousness. And if the I is always joking around and, making a laugh out of something, they oftentimes can't settle down and accomplish the serious task at hand.
Yeah. And so one of the aspects of that, can you call them the drama mama? Is this what you're talking about, where they don't seem to read the situation well, and they overplay the situations more than is necessary.
Yeah, that's right. And it goes back to, in terms of the general characteristics, the general qualities of a difficult person or a high conflict person, back
Yeah.
to that inflexible behavior.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's true for all four of these styles, is that maybe a way we could say this is that they can't be any other way. So, I mean,
Right.
we all might, and I'm glad you asked this, because I probably needed to say this at the outset. All of us are sort of a unique blend of these four.
Yeah.
So
So
we all
true.
have combinations of these four. And again,
Yeah.
none of this is a bad thing, but if we were to talk about, a healthy personality, somebody with, if inflexible behavior is a sign of a difficult person, flexible behavior then would be the sign of an adaptive person.
Right.
And so we, some people might have a little bit of a flair for the dramatic, but
Yeah.
if we have the ability to turn it on and off according to context,
Yeah.
then again, those are the people that could be a little bit fun, or at least in small doses.
Yeah.
But when you have, I've given a couple of work examples. If you have I was working with a church group, and there's this lady who, I was actually present for this particular interaction, that we're just getting ready to, in a small group Bible study, just getting ready to have a time of prayer. And she breaks out into this song off of, apparently, somebody off of American Idol. A few people in the group knew the reference, but does this big dramatic sort of a scene.
Yeah.
And again, not recognizing that, okay, this is a context that requires seriousness.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing we're talking about with the
So
drama
with this
model.
personality type, they like to be the center of attention, they like to be fun, but it becomes problematic when they are unable to read the context, and they always tend to make it about themselves. Is that what you're driving at there?
That's right. When the need to be the center of attention and the need to attract the eyes of people in the room
Yeah.
outweighs the ability to accomplish the task at hand. Or again, I think context is the right word. So
Yeah.
there's times in life where we need to be serious, and there's times in life when we can have fun. And yes, this person's not able to be any other way, is just the way that I like to say it. They're going to be the same way regardless of what the context requires. And that's when it becomes difficult. That's when it becomes problematic. And the way that these people are happens to be dramatic, although there's a number of ways that we can be that aren't fitting to a context that we're in.
Is this where, I mean, you alluded to this earlier in our conversation, the narcissist? Is this where you tend to find narcissistic traits where people tend to want to make everything about them, and if they can't make it about them, they become overly emotional or overly demonstrative about what's going on? Is that what a narcissist is, or am I oversimplifying that too much?
Yeah. So narcissists probably would fit more within the concept of the bully.
Okay.
So drama mamas need to be noticed.
Okay.
Bullies or narcissists need to be, in the extreme version, need to be admired. They need to
Right.
be respected. So it's not so much about being the center of attention, but for somebody with narcissistic traits, it's about being elite. It's about
Okay.
being the best. It's about
Right.
excelling. It's about winning. Remember, for
Yeah.
the bully, it was about winning at all costs.
Yeah.
Whereas with the drama mom, it's more about people. It's not about status.
Okay.
But there are some similarities, because it is about image. With the two of them, it's both about image. It's about being seen in a certain light. So in that sense, there's certainly some overlap there.
Okay, and so talk about the other aspect of this you've mentioned is the victim, and this can be the shadow self of the influencer or the inspirational person. What do you mean by the victim?
Yeah, so some people sort of take on this mentality, this victim mentality. And by the way, I think there's a difference between being victimized
Hmm.
and then maintaining, or taking on and then maintaining a victim mentality.
Yeah.
And probably we've all been victimized in
Yeah.
small ways or large ways. I had my car broken into and a bunch of stuff stolen from me a couple of years ago. I mean, that's probably somewhere on the spectrum of being victimized.
Yeah.
And then some people have been taken advantage of in very heinous ways. It's not even comparable to something like that. But when we take on a victim mentality, we start to believe that we're helpless, and we start to believe that the world owes us.
Okay.
And then some people will, that fit in this category anyway, will sort of be very dramatic in their presentation about the fact that they've been victimized.
Okay.
So, and again, I don't want to minimize. I mean, some of these oftentimes have been victimized, and so we want to be respectful of that and do what we can to accommodate that. And again, these are the out of control versions. So these are the people that, if they have they had an injury during the week, they may show up to work on crutches that weren't given by the doctor, or the physician didn't require them, but they're going to do something to make it noticed, so you see that they're hurting. That kind of a thing.
Is it sympathy that they're trying to attract? Is it, or I guess generally it's attention they're trying to attract, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's in the I category. It's about receiving attention, but specifically there's different types of attention. And yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's sympathy. They want people to feel sorry for you for being a victim. You're absolutely right about that.
Okay. All right. So how do we respond to somebody who perhaps works out of a victim type personality, or maybe they're just overly dramatic, in the sense of attention seeking? So not, like you said, not minimizing people who have genuinely been victimized, but if you're working with someone who is overly acting out for the sake of attention, how can you respond in ways that are healthy and constructive?
Yeah, so again, I think it depends upon the role that you have with the person, but just in general, I think the importance of validating. I think we can validate their experiences, we can validate their feelings, and then we can still make the request that we need to make of them. So we may say something like, I understand that you've been in an accident. I can't even imagine how hard that must have been for you. Most of us here probably haven't been in anything like you've been through, so I know it's got to be hard for you here. And I still need you to go ahead and have this project done by such and such a date. Is there anything I can do to help you make sure that happens?
Great. So it's really about empathizing with what they have experienced, but then having a conversation about how you can move that process forward without letting down the process or the team or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's about empathizing and putting yourself in their shoes, and then using that validating language to really sort of disarm the person. Because as you validate their experience, and particularly saying something like, I can't even imagine what it's been like, I mean, that's going to disarm them immediately. One of the mistakes a lot of people make is to say, oh, I understand. And that's not something you want to say to the victim, because the victim has this belief that you can't understand how bad it is for me. And so when you say, I understand, well, that's a good way to trigger a victim. That's a good way to get the victim to start thinking, how dare you say that? You have no idea what it's like to have been through what I've been through. And so you actually activate them, you actually trigger them rather than disarm them. So by making that initial disarming, that initial statement of, I couldn't even imagine the pain that you're going through based upon, having gone through an accident like that, that disarms them, and they're not able to just immediately fight and say, you don't understand me, look how bad I have it.
That's a really great distinction, because I know I've used that in leadership conversations. I've said, I understand that what you're going through is very difficult, but you're suggesting that even that phrase could be problematic, and we've got to be really careful when we validate people to not give them an opportunity to overplay that victim card.
Yeah. For the victim in particular, I'm talking about here. Now, for a lot of people, saying I understand wouldn't set them off, wouldn't trigger them at all. But again, that's the importance of understanding the mindset and the different types of people, and how you sort of strategically have to approach different people in different ways.
Yeah, great. That's such good advice. I mean, such a small tweak, but it can make such a significant difference. Did you want to say anything more about this particular personality style, the drama mama or the victim, before we move on to the social personality type?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well.
Yeah.
Again, this is just the person that is bringing attention upon themselves. I guess I just sort of gave the tip of with the victim saying, not using the phrase "I understand."
Yeah.
Um, one thing we can do with this type is to give them, because it is about image, it is about recognition. So give them recognition for a job well done. When they
Yeah.
genuinely deserve it, go out of the way to announce it in front of the team, in front of the congregation, in front of the class. I mean, give them their moment in the sun, because that's the way we sort of feed that sort of mentality, and that they feel valued.
Okay, great. So you want to be, if you're praising that sort of personality type, you want to do it publicly. You want to make a big deal of them so that they feel valued, and they're less likely to go down the path of seeking sympathy to get attention.
That's exactly right.
That's great. That's really good.
And it's sort of on one hand, minimizing the behavior that we don't want to see from them, but on the other hand, it's sort of reinforcing what we do want to see, and helping them feel valued as well. So that they really can feel like a valuable member of the team when you make that recognition public with this group.
Yeah, and I don't think I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, the name of the course that you teach on this is called Disarming High Conflict Personalities. And I think that that's a great way of framing it, because in disarming someone, you're not necessarily changing them. You're not responsible for fixing whatever deficiency they may be operating out of. You're using strategies to make the relationship more functional and less dangerous or volatile. Is that how am I understanding it correctly?
That's exactly right, and it's a big shift. For me, in terms of, there's a difference between when you're doing psychotherapy with somebody versus when you're just interacting with them and dealing with them in a certain way. So it's sort of taking, how I've been working with friends and family members all these years, and putting it into sort of practical strategies for dealing with people in these different settings. So that's a key point. There's a big difference between trying to work with somebody in a therapy or coaching setting to help them change a behavior versus interacting with them to make the relationship more functional, whatever type of relationship it is.
That's so good. So good. So the social person, what are some of the qualities of a S-type personality? Maybe some of the positives, and then let's look at the high conflict aspects of the social person.
Yeah, so the S's are your, again, the DISC is based upon, are they people-oriented or task-oriented? And then are they outgoing or are they reserved? And so just to recap, the D was task-oriented and outgoing. Okay, the I was people-oriented and outgoing. So we covered the two outgoings. Now we're going down to the S, which is people-oriented but reserved. So people-oriented but reserved. And so these are your people, if you will. It's all about relationships for the S. It's all about connecting. It's all about, making sure that we have a good relationship. It's all about, making sure that people are supported and feel nurtured and these kinds of things. So but the D might lay in bed at night and say something like, well, we might have run over a few people in the process, but we got that task accomplished. I feel good about the day's work. And the S is laying there in bed thinking, well, we got the task accomplished, but Joanne really got her feelings hurt, and I am really worried about if she's okay tonight.
That's a great distinction that you make there, because I think that's where a lot of conflicts happen. I've seen it in schools, I've seen it in churches, where you have people who, I guess, for want of a better description, are very pastoral. They're very nurturing of the people that they lead. uh, and find it very difficult to lead to tasks or lead to targets because they're so worried about the toll of people along the way. Um, so how does that personality type become problematic? Like if it's, because that sounds like a really good thing. It sounds like, hey, to be that caring and to be that genuine about people's feelings is probably not a bad thing, but at the same time it can be problematic in the way you lead and the way you relate to others.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. These people are very supportive. They're very loyal. They're the kinds of people that you want on your team and in your life, and in all sorts of supportive roles. Absolutely. So, I mean, the way that the S can be problematic is again when they err on the side of being so people oriented that they aren't able to get the task done. I
Yeah.
mean, the S can come into your office and you're checking in to see how they're doing with the project if you're the project manager, and
Yeah.
the S will want to talk for 30 minutes about your family and their family, and
Yeah.
what they did socially that weekend, and how are you doing, and how are the kids, and how's the pet, and at the end of the 30 minutes, the S will walk out of the conversation feeling like, oh, great, I had a great conversation with the
Yeah.
boss. And the boss is just, again, pulling his hair out because, she spent 3 hours talking with all her coworkers, and she's, on schedule to be 3 days behind completing the project.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So some of the negative traits of a social type person is the walking on eggshells. So you have to explain what you mean by that. It sounds like this person cares about people. How is it that they could become someone that everyone has to walk on eggshells around?
Yeah, so the eggshells employee, or just in regular life, if you want to think of it as the landmine, that person you
Mm,
always kind of have to make sure you're not, you're tiptoeing through the landmine so you don't step on something. I mean,
mm,
these are the people that they care about people so much that they're very easily triggered by anything that gets said. They're oftentimes very sort of highly sensitive people.
right,
And
right.
so oftentimes they're going to get their feelings hurt or feel rejected a heck of a
Mm,
lot more than
right.
everybody else is. And so when you're dealing with somebody that's that sensitive and that passionate, they're just very easy to trigger. They're very easy to set off if you say the wrong thing and you
Mm,
use the wrong choice of words.
yeah,
And so oftentimes people, as is reflected by this name, just feel like they kind of have to walk on eggshells because they don't
yeah,
know what they're going to say that might set the person off. And there's usually some sort of misinterpretation there that was
yeah,
never intended by the person who made the comment, but that's how it was received. And so sometimes they can even become, again, we're talking about very extreme versions here,
yeah. Sure, sure.
but they can become very volatile. In less extreme manifestations, you're just talking about people that are pretty moody.
Yeah.
One comment can just kind of ruin their day, kind of a
Yeah.
thing.
Okay. And I've heard it said that the more loving you are, the more vulnerable you are to being hurt. It's like these people seem to have this very caring nature. They're very sensitive emotionally, but it works in reverse. That sensitivity also makes them susceptible to taking offense or taking on hurt unnecessarily.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, sensitivity, as with any personality trait, is sort of a double-edged sword. And so, on one
Mm,
hand, we like this in the people that we're in relationships with. We like
mm,
people to sort of the opposite end of the spectrum of the bully or somebody with more narcissistic traits, that they
yeah.
sort of aren't able to be sensitive enough to
Yeah.
the needs of others. Um, these people are sort of overly sensitive, and also sometimes will even read into situations things that aren't there,
Yeah.
and get their feelings hurt when that really wasn't the intention at all.
Yeah.
So, um, you mentioned Facebook a minute ago. a
Yeah.
lot of people on a lot of people on Facebook will that are in this category, and not everybody. I shouldn't generalize, but a lot of these people will say, "Well, I'm an empath." I'm an
Okay.
empath
Okay.
is one of the
All right.
kind of the buzzwords these days. I feel
Mm,
other people's feelings very
yeah.
intensely, sort of a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And I just had Dr. Lou Augusta on my show a couple of weeks ago. And He is an expert in empathy, and he talks about the need for people to work to a place of having greater empathy. But then, like you say, there's some people who have huge amounts of empathy also makes them susceptible to being hurt or taking offense, perhaps more than is necessary or more than is reasonable in those circumstances.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
So tell me about the yes man, because that's another extreme aspect of the social personality type. What are the characteristics of a yes man, and how is that? How does that create a difficult or dysfunctional relationship?
Yeah, so the yes man or yes ma'am
Mm-hmm.
are the people in our lives that just can't say no. They're going to say yes to everything. And again, there's a spectrum here of people with sort of approval-seeking tendencies.
Yeah.
Probably a number of people listening can identify a time, maybe even in the last week or the last month, when they said yes to somebody, but they really wanted to say no.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the best way to think about it. The person who says yes when they really want to say no,
Right.
but they just can't do it. So they lack assertiveness. They lack the ability to stand up to people, and so obviously that causes problems in romantic relationships. It causes problems in friendships, and it can cause problems in workplaces and school as well. I've had employees who will tell the supervisor, yes, I will do that. I was actually doing a coaching session just a few days ago, and this lady has been making that mistake pretty regularly, telling the supervisor, yes, I will do this, because she's not able to say no. But the deadlines that are being given are really pretty unrealistic. And so she's got all this pressure on herself, and she's stressed out, and then she's taking days off work being sick because she's just not able to stand up and say, no, I just can't take on another project. I've got 3 supervisors assigning me projects for one weekend when I'm supposed to be off, but they just don't have the ability to stand up and say no.
It sounds like that aspect of this personality probably hurts the S personality individual more than it hurts the other people around them. How does this become a conflict challenge when we're talking about difficult people? If you're working with a yes person, how does that become problematic for everybody else around them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And so this is the one, you notice I use the word high conflict, and sometimes I just use the word difficult, because it creates difficulties in situations. But this is the one of all the 8 that probably isn't best characterized as a high conflict person. This person's problem is on the other end of the spectrum. They can be difficult, but they can be difficult because they'll tell you, yes, I'll get it done, but then at the end of the week, it's not done. And so then you've got, one member of the team lagging way behind because they didn't have the ability to tell you, it's just not realistic. I'm not going to be able to make that happen. Whereas if they could have said that, well, then, maybe I could have assigned this project to somebody else, or I could have, delegated in a different way so that everybody on the team was up to speed and we were ready to move forward next Monday. As it is, the one person couldn't tell me that they weren't going to be able to get it done. And so, now I've got all 4 other members of the team just kind of waiting on her. Gotcha. So that's how it can affect other people and affect team members.
Okay. So what is
as well as affecting the S? But your point is well taken, that of all of the difficult personalities, this is probably the one that the person themselves is affected more so than those around them.
Yeah. So what are some strategies that we can use to respond to the S-type personality, especially probably the person that is emotionally volatile, the landmine type personality, where you're walking on eggshells around them? How can you respond to people who you're in relationship or you lead with that context?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the strategies that I mentioned earlier, just in general, was knowing somebody's triggers and avoiding them. And so as you get to know somebody a little bit better, it can feel not quite so much like you're walking on eggshells, because you know what kind of things to say versus what kind of things not to say, to sort of set them off. So learning a person's triggers, can certainly be, be one strategy that's important. Another question that I found to be very helpful, and it sounds pretty simple. Some people think it sounds too simple, but because there's frequently misinterpretation involved, and it's usually they're making something personal. They're taking it personal when it wasn't intended to be. So a pretty simple question that we can ask is just to ask the person, what did you mean by that?
Yeah.
Okay, here's what I heard. Is this really what you meant?
Yeah.
So that's what we can. I'm sorry. That's what we can ask the landmine sort of person to ask. When we're on the other side, when we're trying to manage the relationship, we can clarify what we meant. So we can say, oh, I'm sorry if that's what you heard. That wasn't my intention at all. Could I clarify what I meant?
Okay.
And so when we're working with people, we're coaching on one hand them to ask the question, what did you really mean by that? Because here's what I heard. And on the other side, coaching them to, if you think there's a misinterpretation, to apologize for the misinterpretation. Now, don't apologize for the whole thing, but apologize for your part in the situation.
Okay.
And then try to make a clarifying statement. Here's what I really meant. So clarifying intent is really important with this group.
So again, language choice.
Here's my true motivation. Here's where my heart really is. Because I think anybody can relate with having used the sort of a wrong choice of words from time to time. But if you say, here's where my heart is, please hear my heart. It's harder to argue with somebody's heart.
Where does this land in terms of, we said earlier in the conversation that people would treat us the way that we train them to treat us. If you've got somebody who, say you have to walk on eggshells, they're the landmine type personality. You learn what their triggers are, you try to avoid their triggers, or you tiptoe around their triggers. Doesn't that just reinforce the negative behavior? Aren't we just training them to continue being volatile because we avoid their personality traits without confronting the behavior? Or is it just better off not confronting it? What's the advice there?
Yeah, so a couple of good points. First of all is usually with these highly volatile people or highly sensitive people, this is not, usually this is involuntary. So this is usually not purposeful manipulation. So, if it were purposeful manipulation and we were acting in that way, responding in that way, then we probably are training them to think that way. This is more just their natural reaction. So it's usually not as purposefully manipulative. And so in that way, we're probably, they're probably not giving it that much thought, to be honest.
Sure.
The second thing I would say is, yes, if I were a therapist or coaching this person, then yes, then the goal would be to not reinforce the behavior. If I'm managing this person, my goal isn't to, unfortunately, my goal isn't to, help them long term. My goal is to help them stop blowing up with their current coworkers, or to stop causing dissension in the current congregation by going, behind 3 or 4 people's back and trying to turn so-and-so against so-and-so. My goal isn't to change their entire personality. My goal is to, nip the dissension in the bud so that the gossip stops and people don't start getting the wrong message. So unfortunately, in some senses, you're right. It's more short-sighted. It's more situation management. It's more relationship management, as opposed to having a goal of more long-term healing. Kind of thing.
Okay. And I guess we go back to that whole thing that what we're doing here is we're disarming the person. We're not trying to modify their behavior per se. Yeah, fantastic. And so the C personality type, we come to the last one in the disc, is the cautious personality type. Tell us a little bit about the cautious person, and what are some of their traits? What are some of their good qualities, positive qualities, and what are some weaknesses that we need to look out for?
Yeah, so the C type, in terms of our in terms of our outgoing and task-oriented and reserved and people-oriented, now we're sort of worked our way around DISC. We're to the final quadrant here. So the C is task-oriented and they're reserved. They're task-oriented and they're reserved. So these are cautious. They're usually more quiet people because they're reserved. They're not outgoing. The C is typically very concerned with detail. They're very concerned with organization. And so, I mean, the positive qualities are they can help you organize things well. They can help you, put things in proper order. The C is concerned with high quality. The C wants to make sure things get done right. And so we certainly need people in our lives, and we need people in certain positions that, pay attention to detail. That the S's and the I's are certainly weak in this area. On my personal profile, C is the lowest of all four of the personality types. So I need people that can help me pay attention to detail in my life, can help operate my calendar and make sure my appointments are in order, and, help when I give my presentations in terms of getting things set up in the room and the audio visual and all these kinds of things. I mean, so there's certainly value in certain contexts. Again, it's all about context. In paying attention to detail. I mean, you don't want me being your airline mechanic. Just throw the bolt wherever and let's move on. No, there's places we want people to be very meticulous in how they approach things. So those are certainly some of the strengths of the C's.
Okay, now these personality types can also tend towards skepticism, can't they? Tell us about why skepticism may become problematic in relationship or in leadership.
Yeah, so some people are more cautious in terms of relationships, and so that they can tend to become quite skeptical. They can become quite cynical. They can even become very suspicious, and in a very extreme form, even have some paranoia. So I mean, this is all about trust, and when we can't trust our coworkers or the people that we're on board meetings with or the people that we go to school with, I mean, obviously that can pose some significant problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, does this lead to, I guess, the second Achilles heel of the C-type person is the tendency to overanalyze, because they are skeptical or lack trust. They will overthink or overanalyze any kind of decision that they have to make to ensure that it is legit or kosher, if you like.
Yeah, so the common thread here is sort of the overthinking, the over-analyzing, if you will. The skeptic, it's usually more about overthinking when overanalyzing and being overly cautious with people. With the overanalyzer, it has more to do with things or details or tasks or those kinds of things. So yes, these are the people that are going to ask you 1,000 questions.
Yeah.
And the other three personality types are just going to be going nuts. But the C needs to know. They have to know this, and they have to know that, and they have to know in great detail. Yeah. And so obviously when you're going to ask 1,000 questions that, you've heard the phrase analysis to paralysis. That's this group of persons. So that they just are asking so many why questions, they can't get around to actually doing what needs to be done.
So how do we disarm this type of person? How do we respond in a way that we still make them feel valued and, I guess, heard and listened to, but at the same time not bogged down in the over-analysis of the situation?
Yeah, so again, we always want to start with a validating type of statement. So with this group, instead of validating that you must be in some sort of, you must be in pain that I can't understand based upon what you went through when you were victimized, with this group of person, with this personality style, I should say, we're validating specifically that we share their value for high quality. And so, I really appreciate that you want to have this job done right. And you could even validate, I wish a lot more of the world valued quality. There's a lot of, if you want to use colloquial language with them, there's a lot there, depending on the setting you're in, there's a lot of slobs out there in the world. There's a lot of people that don't take the care to do things well. And so, I mean, I really appreciate that, you value quality. I value things being done right, being done correctly. And so I think you're the person for this job. And also we have a deadline of Friday afternoon. So what can I help you do to make sure we meet that deadline? And
Right.
so usually it involves, checking in with them at certain agreed upon intervals. Now that's a little bit tricky because the overanalyzer likes to be in control. So they
Yeah.
don't, it's all about control. So they don't like to be micromanaged.
Yeah.
So I may want to give them a choice. I'm going to check in with you just to make sure you don't get bogged down here. It's easy to get bogged down in a project of this nature. How would you like to go about that?
Yeah.
Or maybe you give them a couple of options that are acceptable to you and you let them make the choice. So you are checking in to make sure that they're not getting bogged down.
Yeah.
But you're giving them a say in how you do that. Because if you don't, these are the people that will just, you hear the phrase, the forest for the trees. They're just going to get
Yeah.
lost in the detail, and they're going to be working excessive amounts of unauthorized overtime and these kinds of things, not on purpose, but just because their need for perfection, their need for things to be just so, just has them focusing on the minute, and before long, they're miles away from having the big picture project completed.
Are these the type of people that will tend to dig their heels in if you're trying to introduce change or you're trying to lead a group in a particular direction? If they are skeptical or they lack information, do they have a tendency to just dig in and say, "No, I'm not moving until I understand this better"?
Yeah, so I think all of these groups can, maybe with the exception of the S's, but can sort of dig their heels in. It's part of what has to, it's one of the manifestations of the strong beliefs. But the C's in particular, I guess we're talking about the overanalyzers in particular. They're going to dig their heels in if they don't have all the information, if they don't have all the details. They're not going to want to move forward till they have every question answered, and all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, kind of a thing. So it's about detail and having a complete sense of the information with this group. That's what's going to cause them to dig their heels in. If they think if we're talking about the other side of the spectrum, the trigger here is to try to get them to move fast, try to get them to proceed quickly is often a trigger because they think you're not giving this enough thought.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got to move at a pace that they're comfortable with, without getting bogged down too much.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's usually a sort of a meeting in the middle, giving them plenty of time to complete a given project. And I mean, really, it's, if you have a say, depending upon the situation, in terms of the workplace environment, it really speaks to our hiring practices and putting people in the right settings and putting them in jobs where that set of traits that they have is a good fit and where you can give C's plenty of time to accomplish things. And I mean, they're great fits in things like quality control and areas like that. So, one of the hard things is when you inherit a person who's in a situation that's a bad fit for them. So anything that we can do to help create a good fit is, I think, important as well. And what the C ultimately, especially the overanalyzer, ultimately needs to realize is that their 80% is usually better than everybody else's 100%.
So,
And so they can still have excellent quality,
yeah.
which is what the supervisor usually wants. They want excellent and done sooner
Yeah.
versus, so if they can still be excellent, whether they're 80 or excellent, whether they're 100, they need to work at being able to settle for that 80. And that's one of the things that we try to help them be able to get better at in coaching and working with these people individually.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now,
It was actually one guy. It was actually one guy's mantra. My 80% is better than other people's 100%. We had him write it on a card, and he also wrote on another card that we used with him. He said, I've just got to learn to err on the side of sloppy, just to be normal."
I love it.
And that's really what he needed to hear.
That's good. And for the perfectionist type, who I suspect falls into this category as well, that can be a hard pill to swallow, to actually pull back on your perfectionism for the sake of getting the job done.
Very, very difficult, but that's why they're difficult people. They're all difficult in their own senses. They all have very deeply ingrained beliefs or mindsets that aren't easy to change. And that's why the world needs people like you and me to be able to help these people adapt to the situations that they're in, and help leaders be able to work with these people in ways that are conducive to getting the most out of them.
That's great. And so you work with organizations in a coaching capacity, and you also provide DISC assessments. So if people want to apply these DISC personality tests to the people in their team or maybe in their organization, this is something that you actually do. Tell us a little bit about how an organization might implement what your program offers.
Yeah, so again, the trainings that I do are on dealing with difficult people, dealing with high conflict personalities. I've got the three different versions. I've got dealing with high conflict personalities in workplace settings, dealing with them in school settings, and then dealing with them in faith-based organizations as well. But what I offer is I offer trainings on the 8 different types of high conflict people that we've just talked about. And I talk about in very specific detail, how do you identify them? How do you see them coming? We didn't really talk about that in this conversation today, but identifying red flags is a big part of this.
Okay.
I think a lot of people just aren't very good at identifying red flags. So how do you see them coming? Whether it's in an interview, a hiring capacity, or whether it's in your personal life. I just worked with a young lady, and this is a pretty common thing that I hear. People saying, "Oh, he just changed overnight," and they'd been dating for almost a year, and she was in a relationship with a guy who ended up being a con artist. I mean, almost never does somebody just change overnight, because personalities are pretty fixed. I mean, we can change them gradually over time, but almost always the problem isn't that they changed overnight. The problem is that the person didn't recognize the red flags when they saw them. And so, we're almost conditioned in our society these days to be non-judgmental and be strengths-based and just focus on the positive. And it's good to focus on the positive. It's certainly attribute or quality to be able to see the good in people. But if we aren't able to use some discernment and recognize, sort of see this shadow side, as you call it, I mean, that's where we get ourselves in trouble, is if we just ignore those. And so being able to see those red flags, being able to recognize them, that's part of the training. Talking about how to connect with each different personality style, and then what are some strategies for interacting with and some tips for disarming each of those different strategies. So those are the kind of things that I cover in my trainings, that I do in person as well as webinar style. And then working with individuals that organizations or companies or churches have identified that may need some additional coaching in terms of some of these types of things.
That's so good. And if people wanted to get in touch with you in regard to your training and your coaching, is it just your website, Riggenbach.com?
They can go to the website, jeffriggenbach.com, or they can just shoot me an email at difficultpeople at jeffriggenbach.com. Difficultpeople@jeffriggenbach.com. And we can start a conversation there. Also, I've got just sort of a tip sheet on having a difficult conversation. I've got a cheat sheet overviewing the 8 different types of personality styles that we've talked about here today, the sort of out of control manifestations, ways to connect with them, tips for disarming, and then I've got the connected tip sheet for having those difficult to have conversations. And I'd be glad to share that with any of your listeners as well. If you want to shoot me an email at difficultpeople@jeffriggenbach.com, or I can get you a copy and you can post it wherever you want to post it.
Yeah, look, I recommend anybody that's listening, and if they've found this helpful in any way, get a hold of that PDF that Jeff is offering at difficultpeople@jeffriggenbach.com. We'll put the details in the link, also the link in the details of this video and podcast, so that people can access that. Jeff is a best-selling author, 3 times best-selling author. He's got other books on cognitive behavior therapy, personality disorders. So if you really want to dig into what Jeff's talked about tonight and just get to know a little bit more about his field, he is such a knowledgeable and highly sought after trainer and speaker, and so I'd recommend you check out his books, and he's got some DVD trainings on his website as well that you will find really helpful if you are a leader that's looking to cater for the various personality styles that you encounter. Jeff has got a wealth of resource and information. Jeff, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners and watchers before we wrap up this conversation?
No, I don't think so. I would just add on to what you said that the books that are on the website now are on the more clinical side. So don't expect those to be leadership oriented. Those are really more on the clinical side. The leadership book, look for it to come out early next year. And again, that is going to be titled Disarming High Conflict Personalities. And that'll be more on the leadership side and really deal with the issues that we've talked about in this conversation.
Great. And we do look forward to that coming out. When it does come out, make sure you let me know, and
Absolutely.
I will post something up and make sure everybody is able to get a hold of that. Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you tonight. I've learned so much. I find every time we get to chat, I find it very fascinating, and it definitely enlightens me in my practice. So thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. It's great to be with you. Good to chat with you again.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you got a ton of value out of that episode. Don't forget to let us know what you thought in the comments. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover next time, we'd love to hear from you. If you know anyone that would benefit from the content that we produce, please like and share this channel. And we look forward to having you next time on the Tarun Stevenson Leadership Channel.